some of you make some real dumb arguments and I'm gonna beat them down and end this debate once and for all. Okay, I made a video about a year ago where I critiqued some points relating to the politicization of video games put forward by the Axeman, who is a pretty large gaming channel. Now, as a side note, the Axeman actually recently commented on that video and he was a really good sport about it, so thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Okay, now that video probably gets the most frequent comments out of any video of mine. And very often it's people bringing up strikingly similar arguments against me over and over again. And as I am inclined to do, I often reply and argue back. But this happened so many times, I'm not gonna lie, it started to kind of piss me off. And then I realized, hey, this is actually partly my fault. I obviously wasn't clear enough. So today I'm gonna clearly spell out my point of view on the topic and address some popular arguments I often see broadly throughout the internet. Also, it's a point of contention that's kind of topical right now with the alleged leaks about The Last of Us 2 coming out.
The social agenda stuff, I just...
Alright, I'll be focusing on the two major issues that I think people seem to struggle with. The idea of developers forcing agendas and pandering instead of making a quality product. And first, whether or not all games are political.
I'm a black Scottish cyclops!
Okay, now this is a big point of contention. The all games and all media are political meme. The argument goes something like, in some way, even if you think it's insanely subtle or practically non-existent, games still reflect on and comments on aspects of our society, which is inherently political. This is actually an argument that I subscribe to, because at the end of the day, if we define politics as a function of how power is allocated or assigned or distributed within society, then it touches virtually every facet of our lives. In common parlance, I can understand why you wouldn't label certain games as political. You know, when speaking casually with a friend, like I wouldn't either, especially ones that don't explicitly spell out like a political narrative. But technically, they still are political. Yeah, even games like Mario, I could easily argue push some political agendas. If you disagree, you're just wrong, and I'll quickly go through a couple of examples to demonstrate how. So a modern game that has often been cited to me as not political is Doom. And on the surface, yeah, there's not much to it, right? Other than you go around shooting demons. Yet I could make some pretty strong arguments as to how Doom 2016 had some things to say about shitty corporatism. The main antagonists of the game, which was not the demons you fight, but the UAC, the massive multi-planetary mega-corporation of the Doom universe, they go gung-ho with little regard to human suffering in their attempt to harness energy from hell. And it backfires. They knowingly risked human lives in favor of short-term profits. This is highlighted quite a lot throughout Doom 2016 and even in the new Doom Eternal, which I've only played a bit. Now the game just has these little moments of like a very corporatized happy UAC voiceover speaking bland pleasantries over an intercom while there's bedlam all around you.
Thanks to the UAC Hell Merger Initiative, humanity can now reach its full potential.
Or better yet, there was this moment where Samuel Hayden says, "We did this for the betterment of mankind." And then Doom Guy looks down at a dead, bloodied soldier to comically undermine that. That's before we even get deeper into discussions surrounding like weaponry, war, invasion, the religious themes in the game and all the implications of that. At the very least, you should be able to see that there are definite political elements in this game, right? But you might be thinking, oh, they're not forcing an agenda down you. Well, I mean, if you look at it through the right lens, you might think they are actually. But anyway, I'll get to that idea a little bit later on. Alright, well, what about a game like Mario that I previously mentioned? Well, take one of the key factors of the Mario world. Mario is often in pursuit of his love interest, Princess Peach. Now consider for a second that when creating the game in the 80s, instead of Princess Peach, Nintendo thought of Prince Orange to be Mario's love interest. All of a sudden, that becomes very political, right? People back then absolutely would have thought so. Hell, they still would today. However, Princess Peach being a female is equally political. It just doesn't stand out to us as such because it is and was the accepted norm. With every decision you make, you either perpetuate the status quo or go against it. And that reflects a little bit on our society. Maybe not in a vacuum on its own, but no piece of media exists in a vacuum. You take into account how other media also portray and tackle issues such as love, and how society at large views relationships between men and women. Now, to make it very clear, this is not a moral statement or judgment by me. I'm not saying that games should buck the status quo or that Nintendo should have made Peach a man. I'm just saying it is what it is. That whether they go with a princess or a prince is just as political as one another. Now you might argue that, well, there are exceptions to this. What about very simplistic games like Pong or Tetris? And do you know what? I'd probably agree that they aren't political.
But even those, if I really wanted to stretch for it, I could make arguments as to why they are.
Like Pong is essentially tennis, right? And I could make the argument that it points to how we live in a competitive society or something like that. And that can be linked to politics somewhat. But to be honest, I think that's pretty frail, and I'll concede that, okay, these really aren't political games. But for most other games that have more of an explicit representation of humanity or human culture and worlds, yeah, they absolutely are. Okay, just very quickly before I move on, I just thought of an argument or a criticism that I'm sure people would levy at me, and I just want to address it and nip it in the bud. So basically the idea that my definition of what is political is way too broad, and as such the word just loses all meaning. So possibly an example of this is, let's say we describe everything as being awesome. Well, if everything is awesome, then nothing can be, right? But I reject this argument because the concept of something being awesome is very relative, right? There are different degrees as to how good or bad something is, and if it's really, really good, then we describe it as awesome. But to have a consistent definition of what is political, I don't think it exists on like a relative scale. I think it's a binary. So either a piece of media reflects on or implies something about the society we live in, or it does not. And if it does, I'd consider that political. And necessarily so. So that reasoning can't really be applied in this case. Like, oh, so if everything is political, is anything political? It's like, yeah, everything.
Just because everything is something doesn't necessarily make it not, if that makes sense.
So, big takeaway from this is the idea that a game doesn't have to buck social convention or make a controversial statement for it to be political.
They don't even need to intend to make a statement for their game to make a statement.
Case in point, go watch a lot of older movies or even cartoons. You'll find a lot of blatantly racist shit in there. But at the time, it wasn't viewed as particularly controversial and thus not really political.
But we can't deny that despite the creators maybe not having an explicit intention to, their art still imparted some political messaging onto the viewers.
In the same way, in like 40 or 50 years from now, if people look back at our media, they'll see trends that directly reflect the political reality we live in. Media is inevitably influenced by the views of the creator, which in turn influences the views of the consumers and the public.
I mean shit, even our basic ideas of what we consider to be right and wrong, good or evil, any sort of moral messaging is very political.
Almost every time I hear the phrase, "don't politicize video games," what I think they mean to say is, I don't want to be confronted with an idea that makes me uncomfortable. Which is fine. If you don't like the message a game is sending, that's fine. You can criticize it, you can disagree, and you can say, oh, I disagree for these reasons. But don't say it's because it's political. Right? Because everything kinda is, and all of a sudden you'll run out of games to enjoy if you want to remain consistent. And I know what some of you are thinking right now, and this brings me to the next big point I want to talk about.
No, I don't have any issues with them making things political. It's only when they force it to pander and show how woke they are, instead of working hard on making a game good. That's my real issue.
Okay, I want to explore a little bit what it means for something to be forced.
So when people say the developers are forcing something in the game, there's a sense that some element of the game has been, unnaturally shoehorned in by the developers, that there was no good reason for it to be there. It also comes with the idea that they didn't do this as a part of their artistic vision, or maybe not even for some actual righteous cause that they believe in. No, they did it just to win brownie points, or to meet some number on a quota, right? And these arguments are often made in relation to the increased level of diversity in some newer games. So let's break that down.
Now, I think rather than trying to read the minds of the developers and claim that they are obviously disingenuously pandering, which could be a possibility for sure, and I'll get to that. However, I think in most cases that unnatural feeling can largely be attributed to way more simple reasons that I think would be pertinent to at least consider.
Firstly, and it might blow your mind how simple this sounds, the quality of writing is poor.
Actually, the quality of writing is poor because they're trying to force these woke agendas instead of focusing on making a good—
Shut up. This is a three-head brainlet argument. So let's say, for example, you have a female lead superhero that constantly, explicitly, and unironically says stuff like, the future is female, women can do anything men can do. You're just mad at me because I'm a strong woman that makes you a small penis having insecure man. Girl power. Shit like that, you know what I'm talking about. If that sort of thing constantly happens, like in the Batwoman show, for example, which I actually don't know if it happens a lot in that show, but the trailer made it seem like it might.
The suit is literal perfection.
It will be. When it fits a woman.
I'm a woman.
Not gonna lie, I'm kinda cringing. But it's not cringe because the creators thought it might be nice to have a strong female superhero. It's cringe because it's poorly written and the dialogue sucks. There's no subtlety to it, just ugh. Here's the thing though, the quality of writing is independent of wokeness or any political ideology. Maybe I can demonstrate what I mean with another example. So take Rey from the Star Wars movies. I think she got some criticism for being a boring Mary Sue, and that was often attributed to Disney forcing a woke agenda rather than making a good film. But the fact that she's a poorly written, boring, overpowered character is independent of wokeness. Trying to give greater representation to this kind of female lead doesn't necessarily mean the writing has to be poor. It just happens to be in some cases like this one. There are tons of male characters who also suck for similar reasons. Now I loved the original Halo series, but you want to talk about boring characters, let's not pretend like Master Chief is someone who's super interesting and nuanced. We never really see him struggle for anything. He's a super powered armored freak.
But you had something they didn't. Something no one saw but me. Look.
Now some of you might be thinking, oh, he did have to struggle and there are reasons why he is the way he is explained in his deep backstory, but none of this actually ever explicitly or directly manifests in an interesting way in the games you actually play. So I think that's a pretty frail excuse. Fact is, a lot of video game characters exist to appease the player's power fantasies and offer very little beyond that. Or if you don't like the Master Chief example, then there's loads more. What about Gordon Freeman? I mean, he's supposed to be some fucking nerd, and yet from the get-go with practically no training, he's able to use that crowbar as a weapon of mass destruction.
Gordon Freeman!
Or take a lot of the Call of Duty characters from Modern Warfare 2 onwards. Like, you're supposed to be a singular soldier, maybe even a highly trained one. But you just go around single-handedly decimating entire countries, it seems. But somehow always in a morally righteous way. You know, pretty clear Mary Sue shit going on here. There's no accusations of an agenda behind them. Also, you actually can have like an explicit political and social agenda to your story that you want to push without it being necessarily bad, if it's well written. So many popular or critically acclaimed stories and games come with pretty clear political agendas. BioShock, which was a strikingly obvious exploration and critique of Ayn Rand's style ultra-capitalistic and objectivist thought, very clear agenda behind the game, was still a pretty good game. Now there are two conceivable scenarios in which you would feel like it was forcing something. One, you'd think it was poorly written, or two, you're an ardent disciple of Rand's.
Which brings me to the second reason why things may feel forced, which is quite simply, you disagree with the message that's being conveyed. Which is fine. You can make your argument like, hey, these are the messages that the game implicitly or explicitly imparts upon the viewer, and it's bad for these reasons. Make your case, go nuts. But don't pretend that it's because they're trying to push an agenda that annoys you. The agenda pushing doesn't annoy you. What the agenda is what annoys you. Because look, you can have an agenda and still make a quality product.
Those aren't mutually exclusive things. Determining what is forced is an impossible task unless, I don't know, you get like a leaked email from a higher up in the company stating something like, fuck the artistic vision, I'm willing to sacrifice that. We have to include 40 different minority groups so we can surreptitiously turn everyone into leftist woke pansies for no discernible reason. I mean, this is what people seem to think happens.
I guess my point is that there seems to be a greater scrutiny placed on characters who aren't, and I hate to say this really, straight white males.
What you trying to say to me?
It just feels like, oh, you know, minority characters gotta be like exquisitely and masterfully written. Otherwise, it's all just obviously a disingenuous forced diversity woke agenda. And that also just assumes that straight white and male should be the default. People aren't upset about pandering, they're upset that they're not the ones being pandered to. A prime example of this is what happened with Apex Legends and with Soldier 76 from Overwatch. The reveal of Soldier being gay in an Overwatch comic was about as natural as you could have had. He didn't randomly pop out from behind some curtains while holding anal beads and then screaming, "Hey everyone, I'm gay." He was reminiscing through old photos, and there was one with a past boyfriend. Replace that with a woman, and there's no way it would have been a talking point or a backlash nearly as big as that. I heard something to the effect of, I'm not a homophobe, but why did they have to make him gay?
Why are you gay?
Like, I saw this sentiment so often in comments and in reaction videos. You know, same thing with the Tracer reveal and with the Apex Legends characters. And it's like, gay people exist in real life without any reasons behind it, right? And again, like, Overwatch lore fucking sucks. Blizzard's writing is garbage with most of their characters, so really who cares? Half the people bitching about this probably didn't give a crap about the sanctity of Overwatch lore. You never saw people place this kind of scrutiny on Torbjorn's comic. And it was kind of the same thing with like the Battlefield 5 controversy. Now, I'm sure some of the people complaining just didn't like the artistic aesthetic or whatever, but a pretty large amount of the upvoted comments, like at least I saw on the trailer and on Reddit threads, was literally just shit like, her vagina feel, her, what if she gets a period when fighting?
Oh, and don't tell me it's a matter of realism either, okay? That's almost always bullshit.
Battlefield regularly sacrifice historical accuracy and realism in favor of fun gameplay throughout their series, from the weapons that were prevalent and the way they functioned to like absolutely absurd game mechanics.
They let you do a fucking loop-de-loop, leap off a plane into an enemy plane and hijack it, all sorts of goofy shit, and then you're gonna pretend like people care about realism? Come on.
Like, oh yeah, I'm just a one-man army going around in a juggernaut suit mowing down herds of enemies. No, but this is where I draw the line at realism. Don't get me wrong, I do kinda understand the sentiment behind the forced argument, and I'm sure there are plenty of occasions where products and companies co-opt progressive talking points or language just to sell their shit. And look, a big aspect of this is certainly the business side of things. The pool of active gamers have expanded and continue to expand. If you want to entice as many of them as possible to buy a product, that means appealing to them. But appealing to or pandering to a certain demographic to entice them to buy your game has always been a thing. Not to mention, or to just reiterate again, that doesn't necessarily come at the expense of a quality product. And also, at the same time, developer teams are also increasingly getting more diverse, and this could be important to a lot of those workers. For at least some of them, they're probably not faking it. I just realized that a lot of the arguments around this could just stem fundamentally from a skepticism of whether or not representation really matters. And yeah, it does. Maybe not for you personally, but for a lot of people, it can have a pretty significant impact in not only how they are perceived by others, but also in how they perceive themselves. Now, all of this does mean that there will be poorly written minority characters or characters that parrot unsubtle, tired, woke talking points. Cringe writing will always be a thing, regardless of political affiliation. Alright, a quick too long didn't watch recap.
Whenever people say, I don't like that they're trying to force or shoehorn an agenda, or they're pandering, what they really mean is, I disagree with the message they're sending, or the quality of the writing sucks.
It just feels like to me a lot of times when people make this forced diversity argument, they aren't being completely upfront with their real thoughts on the matter. And probably in a lot of cases even to themselves. And they use those arguments as a convenient shield rather than honestly putting what they think out there. Because the actual arguments they end up spouting don't make much sense. Just own your position. Don't hide behind the forced agenda meme, or try and use that to cushion or soften your actual critical thoughts. Alright, I'm done. Smash and obliterate all the buttons and the bells. And yeah, peace.